OpenAI, one of the leading figures in the artificial intelligence research landscape, recently went through a tempest of controversy. And it all revolved around Sam Altman, the organization's CEO, who found himself ousted from the position only to be reinstated amidst a wave of protests from employees. Now, this tale is riddled with ideological clashes, deeply rooted within OpenAI's structure. The non-profit organization, founded in 2015, went through quite a transformation, splitting into a non-profit and a for-profit entity to raise funds and attract top AI talent. But the divisions didn't stop there. The term AGI, artificial general intelligence, had different meanings to different people within the organization. And this subjectivity led to tensions, disagreements, and ultimately, a revolution of sorts. And if you think this is the end of it, oh, you're in for a surprise. Because the real curiosity of the story. We'll get to that soon enough. Hey there, curiosity explorers. Ready for another dive into the unknown? I'm your guide, Caesar, and I've got Sonia with me.
Hey there, all you seekers of knowledge. Let's unravel a new tale today, shall we?
We're counting on you, dear listeners. So, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop us a comment, and share the love for Curiosity Wonderland with your friends. Your participation truly makes this journey worthwhile. Diving into the storm that recently shook OpenAI, we come across some interesting points. The company, which was initially conceived as a non-profit by Elon Musk and Sam Altman, aimed to navigate the intricate path of artificial intelligence development away from for-profit motivations. Their mission was to create AI that would positively impact humanity. But there was a catch.
Isn't there always?
Indeed. A few years down the line, it became clear that this noble mission would require a lot of capital. You know, the kind of money that can't always be easily raised through a non-profit structure.
So, they had to rethink their strategy?
Exactly, and in 2019, they decided to create a for-profit entity under the non-profit umbrella. This allowed them to raise venture funding and attract top AI researchers. But it also set the stage for future conflicts.
The ideological clashes within the organization, right?
Yes, and these weren't minor disagreements. They were clashes over the very definition of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and what it means to do good for humanity. The thing is, there's no consensus on these terms, which left them open to interpretation and, inevitably, conflict.
And I guess all this conflict is what led to the firing and reinstatement of CEO Sam Altman?
That's right. But remember, that's just the tip of the iceberg. To really understand the chaos at OpenAI, we need to dive deeper. And we will, right after this break. To better understand the roots of OpenAI, we need to rewind a bit. The story of artificial intelligence is not a new one. It dates back to the 50s when it was primarily an academic field of study.
That's right. But it wasn't until tech giants like Google and Facebook saw its commercial potential that things really started to change, wasn't it?
Correct. They saw the potential in AI and began to recruit researchers from universities to develop these technologies for their commercial products. This shift in the last decade is significant.
And that's where Elon Musk steps in, right?
Indeed. Elon Musk was quite concerned about this trend. He saw Google, an early adopter of AI's commercial potential, essentially monopolizing the field. They were building a large lab and attracting top talent from around the world.
And he wanted to provide an alternative path for AI research?
Precisely. He believed in creating AI for the betterment of humanity, not just for commercial gain. This belief led to the birth of OpenAI as a non-profit organization. Its mission was to resist the commercialization of AI research by tech giants and focus on the safe development of this technology for humanity.
But as we've already discussed, the need for funding led them to restructure, creating a capped profit entity under the nonprofit umbrella.
Yes, and it was this change that set the stage for the ideological clashes we've seen recently, culminating in the firing and reinstatement of CEO Sam Altman.
An unfolding drama indeed. Ready to delve deeper?
Absolutely. Let's keep exploring the chaotic world of OpenAI after this short break.
You know, this all reminds me of a childhood memory. When I was about 10, my dad got me my first chemistry set. I was over the moon. I had these grand visions of creating concoctions that would change the world.
Sounds like you were a little scientist in the making.
I'd like to think so. But the reality of my chemistry set was somewhat different. I had all these colorful liquids and powders, but the experiments in the manual were, well, lackluster. My dad, seeing my disappointment, suggested we go off script. He reminded me of the great scientific minds who didn't follow set paths, but forged their own ways, much like Elon Musk's vision for OpenAI.
That's a great analogy.
Right? Now, replace my chemistry set with artificial intelligence, and you've got a similar situation. OpenAI had a vision to do something different with AI, not just follow the commercial path laid out by tech giants. But, just like my chemistry set, things didn't go according to plan. They ran into issues of scale, which led to financial issues and the realization that they needed a for-profit arm.
So, in a way, they had to go off script, just like you and your chemistry set.
Exactly, but with much bigger stakes. And in the end, this deviation led to tensions within the organization and the recent turmoil. It's a fascinating story, isn't it?
Absolutely. It just shows how even with the best intentions, the path to innovation is never linear. Let's continue uncovering this tale after a short break. So, after switching to this hybrid non-profit and capped profit structure, OpenAI found itself in a bit of a predicament. While the mission remained the same, the dynamics within the organization changed.
I can imagine that would have raised some eyebrows internally.
Absolutely. You see, some people had joined OpenAI under the premise that it would remain a non-profit. The sudden emergence of a for-profit entity created a sense of unease and uncertainty.
But it wasn't all negative, was it?
No, it wasn't. In fact, one of the main outcomes of this structural shift was that employees started to receive higher compensation. Before the change, OpenAI was struggling to retain talent. They were losing their people to organizations like Google or DeepMind, who were offering more competitive packages.
So, the change was necessary to keep up with the market and retain their talent.
Exactly. By becoming a hybrid structure and raising venture funding, they could offer stock options and higher compensation packages through the capped profit arm.
I see. It seems like a costly but necessary move to stay competitive in the AI research field.
It appears so. However, this change set the stage for the recent events we've been discussing. It just goes to show that even the best laid plans can give rise to unforeseen challenges. Now, shall we delve deeper into the consequences of these changes after a short break? Now, let's bring Sam Altman into the picture. Prior to becoming the CEO of OpenAI, he was president of Y Combinator, a renowned startup incubator in Silicon Valley. He was quite young when he became president, early 30s, I believe, and people were initially skeptical.
Interesting. So, he was a bit of an outsider?
Yes, but he quickly proved his mettle, becoming known for turning startup ideas into successful, aggressive tech giants. When he stepped into the CEO role at OpenAI in 2019, that's when we started seeing a push for commercialization and scaling.
Can you give us some examples of this shift in approach?
Well, for one, after the development of ChatGPT, OpenAI formed a growth team dedicated to expanding its user base. This was a departure from its previous focus on research. Altman's influence was evident. His experience in scaling startups was now being applied to OpenAI in a big way.
So, before Altman came on board, OpenAI was more like a university lab?
Yes, exactly. It was seen as an alternative to being a professor. You could do fun research, there were no strings attached, and you were paid a lot more. With Altman's arrival, however, the focus shifted towards commercialization and growth.
It seems like a classic case of how leadership can change an organization's direction.
Indeed. However, this shift wasn't without its consequences, which we'll delve into after this short break. So, Sam Altman's leadership style seems to be a bit polarizing within the organization.
How so?
Well, some folks view him as a legendary figure in the Valley and greatly admire his leadership. However, others find him difficult to read and pin down, which can be a cause for concern.
And what about his rapid push for commercialization of OpenAI? Was that part of his vision or just old habits creeping in?
That's a good question. It's hard to say for sure. It could be his techno-optimist belief driving the push or simply him falling back on what he's good at.
And didn't he start a fund for OpenAI to invest in other startups?
Yes, he did. It seemed a bit unusual since OpenAI was not profitable at the time. But Sam is an investor at heart. It could be just habit.
Let's shift our focus a bit. Can you tell us more about Greg Brockman's role?
Certainly. Greg Brockman, like Sam, has spent his entire career in startups. He's been around the tech scene in Silicon Valley for quite some time and was one of the original members of Stripe.
So, he's had a considerable impact on the tech we use today?
Absolutely. In fact, if you're using a ChatGPT wrapper in Stripe for your payment system, there's a good chance Greg Brockman built a large part of your application. Greg Brockman has had quite an unconventional journey. After dropping out of both Harvard and MIT, he went straight to the Valley, joined Stripe, and became the Chief Technology Officer. He gets a thrill from building and shipping products, seeing people use the things he's created.
Sounds like a hands-on guy.
Absolutely. Interestingly, under his and Sam's leadership, OpenAI was seen as the most Silicon Valley-esque of all AI firms. Despite other major research models like DeepMind maintaining an academic environment, OpenAI was perceived as being more about build, and move fast.
From what you're saying, it seems as though their backgrounds had a strong influence on the direction of the company.
Exactly. Neither Sam nor Greg come from an academic background. They're both from the commercial world, so when they joined forces, it was clear to everyone that this was the new direction for OpenAI.
And Greg was the first employee of OpenAI, right?
Yes, he was. He raised his hand to turn Sam and Elon Musk's vision into reality. He recruited the first team and led the company before Sam stepped in as CEO. They share core ideologies, which is why when Sam was fired, Greg also announced he was leaving. This was a turning point for the employees, raising questions about the future of the organization. Greg's departure was a major signal to the employees that something wasn't right.
It sounds like a real shockwave through the organization.
Absolutely. The employees were completely in the dark about these changes. They found out about the board's decisions at practically the same time as the rest of the world. This understandably led to a lot of confusion, fear, and eventually, anger.
I can imagine. And the board didn't provide any explanations?
That's right. The lack of answers from the board only fueled the employees' frustrations. They felt they deserved some clarity.
Especially considering how invested they are in the company's mission.
Yes, indeed. At OpenAI, it's not just a job for the employees. They truly believe in the mission and view it as more of a life dedication. The events really shook this deeply ingrained belief, causing a lot of emotional turmoil. This situation led to the employees taking matters into their own hands. They started organizing on Twitter, posting similar messages and retweeting Sam Altman's posts.
Twitter became their platform for expression.
Exactly. They were trying to send a strong message to the board by showing their unity and demanding answers.
And that escalated to them signing a letter, right?
Yes, over 700 out of the 770 employees signed a letter stating they'd quit if Sam wasn't reinstated.
It sounds like OpenAI was close to a complete shutdown.
It certainly seemed that way. But there's more to consider. Most of the employees' compensation packages are majority stock.
So, if the company went under, their stock would be worthless?
Correct. This was a massive concern as some employees had already made large purchases based on projected income. Others on visas had their ability to stay in the country jeopardized.
The ripple effects of this situation were far-reaching and personal, far beyond just the company's future.
Yes, it wasn't just about the company's identity or ideology. These were real people with real lives that were being affected. It was a highly emotional and tumultuous time for everyone involved. When Altman was reinstated, it was a massive sigh of relief for the employees. They still had their jobs, the company they'd dedicated so much to was still standing, and they could continue the work they had embarked on.
It must have been an incredible moment.
Absolutely. But it's worth noting that OpenAI has had its share of disruptions in the past. To understand the current situation thoroughly, we need to delve a bit into the company's history.
I'm guessing it's not all been smooth sailing.
Far from it. OpenAI uses very vague terms to define their mission, making it subject to ideological interpretation. As a result, there have been significant ideological clashes leading to friction and splits within the company.
Sounds like a recipe for conflict.
Indeed. One of the first and most significant battles was between the co-founders, Elon Musk and Sam Altman. I keep thinking about how fascinating this world of innovation is, with its clashes, its breakthroughs, and its high stakes. What about you, listeners? Are you enjoying diving into the world of OpenAI and its internal dramas as much as we are? Remember to let us know what you think. We love hearing from you. There was a significant disagreement between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, leading to Musk's exit from the company in early 2018. Moreover, he took all the money he had promised OpenAI.
That surely must have been a huge blow.
Indeed. This unexpected turn of events was a crucial factor in why OpenAI ended up becoming a for-profit entity. They needed a vast amount of money to continue pursuing the type of AI research they were interested in.
Then they developed GPT-3, after which they started thinking about commercialization, right?
Yes, they were considering developing a business product and allowing companies to build apps on GPT-3. However, there were disagreements over the timing and method of commercialization. These disagreements led to senior scientist Dario Amadei's departure, along with a large part of his team.
And they went on to become one of OpenAI's biggest competitors.
That's right. They founded Anthropic, which has become a significant player in the AI industry. Now, it's worth noting that AI has seen many hype cycles and often failed to deliver on the massive expectations.
Like IBM's Watson, which was touted as a revolution in healthcare, but didn't quite deliver on that promise.
Exactly. And those concerns about whether or not these powerful AI models are safe have led to some of them not being released publicly. The Transformer model, which forms the basis of GPT technology used by OpenAI, was initially developed inside Google before it was widely released. There were essentially two schools of thought when it came to the development and release of AGI.
Do you mean like two different camps of thinking?
Yes, exactly. One camp was the techno-optimists, who favored quick and iterative releases of AI technology.
So they thought the technology should be adapted and evolved in real time?
Yes, the idea was to familiarize people and institutions with the technology gradually rather than abruptly. They also believed commercialization is key for funding safety research.
And the other camp, what did they propose?
The other camp is what you might call the existential risk camp. They prioritized safety and advocated for comprehensive testing before any release.
So they were more cautious and wanted to ensure only positive outcomes?
Exactly. They wanted to predict and mitigate possible negative impacts before the technology was released to the world.
It sounds like these differing philosophies could lead to a lot of tension.
Indeed, and this ideological clash was precisely the reason for the split between OpenAI and Anthropic. Sam Altman and Greg Brockman leaned towards the techno-optimist approach, while Dario and Daniela Amadei advocated for the existential risk perspective. The clash between the techno-optimist and existential risk camps continued even after the split. OpenAI started releasing more AI models for consumers, including ChatGPT, which reached around 100 million users.
That's an impressive number.
Yes, it was. This release marked a significant turning point. When you put a technology in the hands of so many people, it tests your company infrastructure and the ideologies you've been operating on in the theoretical realm.
So, how did the two camps react?
Well, the techno-optimists saw the success of ChatGPT as confirmation of their approach. They saw the diverse and imaginative ways people were using the technology, which reaffirmed their belief in releasing these technologies iteratively.
They must have felt vindicated.
Yes, they did. They thought it was time to continue building on this momentum and advancing the productization of their technology. On the other hand, the existential risk camp saw the release of ChatGPT as a manifestation of their fears about the potential harms of the technology.
They were concerned about misuse, right?
Exactly. With 100 million people using the technology, there were bound to be some individuals using it in harmful or abusive ways. The company was not prepared for these scenarios because they hadn't anticipated that ChatGPT would become such a big deal.
So they were caught off guard.
Yes, and this raised fears in the existential risk camp about being able to predict the potential devastating impacts of the technology. If they couldn't predict how popular the technology would become, how could they foresee its possible destructive effects? The release of ChatGPT seemed to accelerate the ideological differences between the two camps. They diverged even more in their beliefs.
I can imagine that caused a lot of tension.
It did. We don't know the exact reason, but it seems the tension might have led to the board's decision to attempt to fire Sam Altman.
The board decided to fire him?
Yes. The context suggests that there was a struggle between the nonprofit and for-profit arms of the company. The board upheld the idea that the nonprofit mission should remain central, while some, including Altman, believed they should continue with commercialization.
So, it was basically a power struggle?
That's one way to look at it. However, the board hasn't provided much clarity about the decision. All we know is that they stated they had lost trust in Altman as a leader and in his candor.
It sounds like a lot was happening behind the scenes.
Indeed. There's been a lot of speculation, and some staff researchers even sent a letter to the board warning about a so-called breakthrough, which OpenAI confirmed was not related to the board's actions. It's important to remember that breakthrough is a subjective term. In science, something is typically deemed a breakthrough after significant testing, validation, and consensus that it has withstood the test of time. When it comes to this so-called breakthrough, not everyone within OpenAI even agrees with the employees who sent the letter. It's an interpretation that only a select few have assigned to what they were observing within the company.
So, it's a subjective issue.
It seems so. The AI industry often seems to work in the eye of the beholder, where people aren't always sure what they've built or fully aware of all the capabilities of these tools.
That must make it difficult to assess potential dangers.
It does. In fact, one of the challenges is how to determine if something is dangerous. To address this, OpenAI, and some other organizations like Anthropic and Google, have developed a process called red teaming.
What does that involve?
Red teaming involves bringing together experts from various fields like cybersecurity, national security, or biology before releasing a model. These experts try to make the model do harmful things. For example, with GPT-4, they tested if it could be used to create malware.
And then they try to rectify these issues?
Exactly. Once an expert identifies a potential harm, the researchers within the company take that feedback and refine the model until it stops doing the harmful action. However, this process has been heavily criticized.
Criticized? Why?
Because OpenAI has had a particular focus on extreme risks like existential risks or national security risks, and they've often overlooked other types of harms that are present and impactful. For instance, discrimination is a significant issue. AI models can perpetuate discrimination because they reflect the data they're trained on. It's practically impossible to get a data sample that perfectly represents every dimension of our world. These biases aren't just theoretical. They've manifested in very tangible ways. For instance, facial recognition technology doesn't work as well on dark-skinned individuals and doesn't work as effectively on women as it does on light-skinned individuals and men.
Is that because of the data it was trained on?
Exactly. When the technology was first developed, the photos used for training were predominantly of light-skinned male individuals. These biases are true for every AI model that has ever been developed.
Can you give us an example of this?
Sure, large language models like GPT-4, for instance, would often default to using the pronouns he/him when discussing a profession like engineering. These biases are codified into the model.
Is anything being done to rectify these biases?
OpenAI has recently done some research on this, but historically they have de-emphasized these issues. They've focused more on extreme risks rather than these more pervasive, everyday types of harm.
Right, so the issue of safety isn't just about avoiding extreme risks, but also addressing these everyday biases. Is that correct?
Yes, it's important to clarify that AI safety, as OpenAI defines it, is different from what we might typically think of around engineering safety. It seems to me that part of their challenge moving forward will be to reconcile these different facets of safety while also pursuing their commercial goals. It's important to note that there's a difference between engineering safety and AI safety. If we say a bridge is safe, it means it's structurally sound and can support a high volume of traffic. But AI safety, particularly in the context of OpenAI, is primarily focused on avoiding extreme risks.
That's an interesting distinction. But I'm curious, are there any other industries or fields that have faced similar safety challenges?
In the field of biotechnology, for example, researchers have to be equally cautious when dealing with genetically modified organisms. The potential for unintentional harm is vast, and it requires a careful balance between innovation and risk prevention.
That's an apt comparison. I suppose the challenge then is how to ensure that ideological clashes, like the one we saw with OpenAI, don't hinder progress.
Yes, and this is where things get tricky. Given that no one quite agrees on what artificial general intelligence is, disagreements are almost inevitable. The AI research talent pool and the broader Silicon Valley talent pool are split along these ideological lines.
But isn't diversity of thought generally a good thing?
Absolutely. Differing perspectives can lead to innovation. However, when it comes to defining the future of AI, these ideological splits can lead to conflicts. Even if you reshuffle or restructure, you're likely to encounter a full range of beliefs within the company.
And I guess reconciling these differences becomes the real challenge.
Yes. One of the biggest takeaways from all of this is that policymakers, consumers, and the general public need to recognize that AI technologies are made by people and are the product of conscious decisions. If we want a better future with better AI technologies, then it's up to all of us, not just tech companies, to make that happen.
Absolutely. It's a collective responsibility. Speaking of responsibilities, did you know that one of the earliest cases of AI responsibility was the Therac-25 radiation therapy machine?
Oh, do tell.
Back in the 1980s, the Therac-25 was a state-of-the-art machine used for radiation therapy. But it had a programming error that led to at least 6 instances where patients were given radiation doses that were hundreds of times greater than intended, resulting in patient injuries and deaths. It was one of the first times that a software defect in a machine had serious consequences, and it led to significant changes in how medical devices are regulated. It's a stark reminder of why safety is so crucial in technology.
It's clear that we can't rely on a small board or company to represent the interests of all humanity, particularly in a field as vast and consequential as AI.
You're right. It's interesting to contrast this with the open source culture that's so prevalent in the technology space.
Indeed, open source has been transformative for many aspects of technology. However, the recent events at OpenAI have sparked a heightened awareness of the importance of open source AI development.
And by open source AI development, we're talking about making AI models freely available to the public?
Yes, models that can be accessed and worked on by anyone, which some see as a form of democratizing AI. This is typically done through platforms like GitHub or Hugging Face.
But this democratization comes with its own set of challenges, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Just because a model is available for everyone to use doesn't necessarily mean the process is democratic. For instance, Meta, the company behind Facebook, has been seen as a champion of open source AI. They release models and allow anyone to commercialize off of them.
But that doesn't mean everyone agrees with what they're doing, does it?
Exactly. No one other than Meta has a say in whether or not these models are released. This can be seen as undemocratic. Furthermore, while anyone can download and manipulate these models, Meta doesn't share how the technology was developed.
So the open source model doesn't necessarily promote transparency?
Not in its current form. There's a growing call for companies to open source the data used to train these models, which would be a significant step towards true transparency and democratization. One of the ways to increase the democratic governance of AI technologies would be to open source the data used to train the models. This would enable more researchers to study the nature of the data being used and how it correlates with the output.
Could you give us an example of how that might work?
Absolutely. Let's take a language translation model for instance. If a company open sources the data used to train this model, researchers can examine exactly what kind of texts were used. Was it a variety of literature from different cultures? Or was it primarily technical manuals? This could explain why the model translates certain phrases well and struggles with others.
And this approach wouldn't necessarily accelerate the competitive race in AI development?
Not necessarily. While it would make the process more transparent, it wouldn't automatically lead to an increase in the proliferation of AI models. Instead, it could lead to more research, debate, and ultimately better models that are less computationally and data intensive, and therefore better for the environment.
That sounds like a much more beneficial approach to AI development. But what about the governance aspect?
Well, the recent events at OpenAI provide a valuable lesson in this regard. Self-regulation doesn't seem to work, even when the company is structured as a non-profit and theoretically has no financial obligations.
Could you expand a bit on why self-regulation proved problematic in this particular case?
Of course. The board of OpenAI made certain decisions regarding their leadership that resulted in controversy and upheaval. This has led to calls for an investigation and a temporary interim board. The way these decisions were communicated also came under criticism. This entire saga illustrates that even with the best intentions, self-regulation can lead to issues of accountability and transparency. The fallout at OpenAI really underscores the importance of external governance in regulating the development of AI technologies. It's high time we realize that self-regulation, even in its most creative form, doesn't work as intended.
That's quite true. It does seem to be a universal pattern.
Do you remember the big data leak last year, where the majority of users weren't even aware of how their data was being used and manipulated?
Oh, absolutely. It's uncanny that you mentioned that. Just last week, I was reading a report about how my personal data might have been involved in a similar breach.
It's unsettling, isn't it? We're living in a world where AI impacts every aspect of our lives, our education, our work, our personal lives. It's crucial that we all recognize we have a voice in this and should use it.
Yes, I totally agree. Watching these events unfold, it feels as though we're spectators, sidelined from participating or voicing our concerns. It's a stark reminder that we need to be proactive in voicing our concerns about the regulation of these technologies.
And it's not like there's no action being taken. Policymakers are actively working on regulations. Various agencies across the globe, including the US, Europe, and China, are advancing on these regulations.
That's correct. And in democratic societies like ours, we have the unique opportunity to communicate our desires to our representatives and to influence the direction of these regulations. It's high time we seized that opportunity.
It's true that the effectiveness of regulation is a concern. Just because a regulation has been passed doesn't mean it's well-crafted or effective. The tech world moves at a breakneck pace, and the legislative process often struggles to keep up.
So what's the solution? How do we ensure that regulations are meaningful and effective in keeping up with the rapid developments in AI?
It's a complex issue. On one hand, we have regulatory capture, where special interest groups wield undue influence over the regulatory process. This often results in policies that favor those groups rather than the public interest.
Can you give an example of this?
Sure. Say a large tech company, with its army of lobbyists, is able to shape a regulation in a way that favors its own business model. This could result in rules that are too lax or ones that stifle smaller competitors who can't meet the same standards. On the other hand, there's the issue of expertise. Often, there's a narrative that only AI experts can understand and guide the development of AI. This can sideline the voices of those directly impacted by these technologies.
That's interesting. Could you provide an example of how this might play out?
A good example would be the usage of AI in credit scoring. Just because someone doesn't have a deep understanding of AI doesn't mean they can't provide valuable insights on its impact. For instance, individuals who have been unjustly denied a loan due to an AI system's bias have first-hand experience of its real-world implications. Their voices are crucial in shaping fair and effective regulations.
It seems like the key takeaway here is that regulation of AI requires a diverse set of voices and perspectives, not just those of AI experts or big tech companies.
Absolutely. It's a collective endeavor that requires input from all stakeholders. And while expertise is important, it should not be used as a gatekeeping mechanism to exclude others from the conversation. One aspect we haven't touched on yet is the role of local-level regulation. We often focus on federal-level regulation or international governance, but significant decisions are being made at a local level too.
Like in schools and police departments?
Exactly. Schools are considering how to integrate AI into classrooms. Teachers, parents, they're the ones directly involved and should have a say in this. They understand their students and how AI might impact their learning experience.
And with police departments?
Many departments are acquiring AI technologies. The people living in those cities should have a say in how these technologies are used and whether they should be acquired at all. Regulation can sometimes be more effective at a local level because it's more tailored to the context and can react more quickly. It's not just about voicing your concerns to federal agencies and Congress. It's also about getting involved at a city, town, school, or workplace level.
It feels empowering to know that every one of us has the power to influence the development and application of AI technology in our own ways.
Absolutely. Every voice matters when it comes to shaping the future of AI. And remember, it's not just about the technology itself, but how it interfaces with people, its real-world implications. That's what we need to focus on when we're thinking about regulation. And there you have it, folks. Through all the turmoil and upheaval at OpenAI, from the firing and reinstatement of CEO Sam Altman, the ideological clashes, and the ever-evolving interpretations of AGI, we see a larger question emerge: how can we develop and regulate AI technologies in a way that truly benefits humanity?
Indeed. The challenges OpenAI faces aren't unique to them. They're indicative of the broader struggles within the AI industry. The task at hand is to ensure that we have democratic processes and governance in place that take into account all stakeholders, not just AI experts or large tech companies.
And that's not an easy task. It's like trying to program a self-driving car to not only follow traffic rules, but to also understand the spirit behind those rules.
Well put. We hope you found this episode as enlightening as we did. If you did, why not give that like button a blast? And don't forget to leave your comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on AI regulation and the role you think the public should play.
Absolutely. And don't keep this podcast to yourself. Share it with your friends, your family, your pet parrot, anyone who'd be interested in these timeless curiosities and mysteries we explore here.
Thank you all for joining us on this journey. We appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, keep asking questions and stay curious.
Goodbye, everybody, and remember, the world is full of wonders waiting to be uncovered. Until our next episode, keep exploring. This episode was inspired by The Chaos Inside OpenAI, Sam Altman, Elon Musk, and Existential Risk Explained, written by Karen Hao and published on Big Think on December 1, 2023. If you're keen on diving deeper, you can find the full article link in our video description. That's all for now. See you next time.